Welcome to today's podcast episode, Nacha and ACH, 50 years and still safe. I'm Tim Mills, your host and the Emerging and Digital Payments Manager here at Regions. In today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the world of automated clearinghouse payments, commonly referred to as ACH. And whether you're a financial professional, a tech geek, or just really curious about the evolution of money movement, I think this episode is going to shed some light on why after 50 years, the ACH network remains a benchmark for safety and reliability. So let's jump right into it. I'm joined on this episode by Devin Marsh, Senior Director of Network Administration at Nacha. Welcome to the podcast, Devin.
Happy to be with you, Tim. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, glad that you were able to join us.
Sure.
Listen, I'd like to start off by providing, our listeners with a little bit of background on the topic today. Many folks may be familiar with ACH, but there may be those that may not have as deep of an understanding of the history of the network. And, I would share with our listeners that the ACH network is really one of the most secure and efficient systems for processing electronic payments here in the U.S. Some would even say it's the grandfather, or as the young folks would say, the OG of electronic payments, since it was established back in the early 1970s, really in response to the increasing volume of paper checks and some of the operational inefficiencies and risks that came along with that. The ACH network actually began with just a handful of banks out in Southern California that agreed to exchange transactions electronically between themselves. And from that austere beginning, we now have a national payments network that last year processed over 30 billion ACH payments that were worth over $80 trillion in value. And those payments are facilitating things like tax refunds, rebates, salary and benefit payments via direct deposit, invoice and trade payments, and e-commerce purchases, just to list a few examples. And, I don't think that you can discuss ACH payments without acknowledging a very important part of the network ecosystem, and that's Nacha. So, Devin, I'm sure that many of our listeners are probably familiar with either ACH by name or some of those use cases that I just rattled off, but they may not know who Nacha is and what role it plays in the payment system. You mind providing an introduction or an overview?
Sure, happy to. Nacha is an organization. It's not a governmental agency. It's a non-government body, but it's the governing body for the ACH network. It provides the rules, it administers the rules, keeps them updated annually, and the rules enable the transaction of ACH debit and credit payments. They enable the use cases you described: direct deposit, direct payment, that probably every American is touched by in some way or another. Nacha has been around for 50 years now, celebrating our anniversary, and we provide not only the rules that underpin the network, but also services to support the community that uses the network. So educational opportunities, accreditation for professionals that work in this space, and also some consulting services through our Nacha Consulting Group for particular, more deep dive cases for originators and financial institutions.
Got it. So I'm going to use what's probably a weak analogy here.
Okay.
But if the ACH network is sort of like a symphony orchestra moving payments to and fro, Nacha really acts as a conductor, really making sure that everything's in harmony.
To some extent it does. To some extent it was the composer that wrote the score for it. And to some extent in the daily performance, it helps orchestrate it. But there are other participants as well. There are network operators that serve as the hub that financial institutions transact through to get transactions from one institution to a receiver at another. But yes, Nacha has a central role like that. Composer, conductor, that may be a good analogy.
All right. Well, I love it, Devin, that you were able to jump right in on that horrible analogy and make it work. So I appreciate that.
Yep.
Listen, as Nacha celebrates 50 years as a network administrator,
Mhm.
I think it would be really informative if you could walk through the key milestones that have really defined the evolution of the network and its continued relevance in this very digital age that we live in.
Sure. I'll try to put these in chronological order so you can see how they kind of build on each other over time. But first is one you mentioned early on with direct deposit. In the 1970s, it made payday vastly more efficient for many, many working people, probably most working people. No longer a need to take a physical check to a bank or an ATM or wherever they might want to deposit it or cash it. So that was the first one. The second one was several years later when Nacha worked on rules to enable the conversion of checks into electronic transactions. This was accelerated after the 9/11 disaster and the movement of checks was frozen for a brief period of time. That highlighted the need to transact in a different way. So check conversion at the point of sale, in the back office, in a lockbox environment, those are all cases based on Nacha rules that enable the conversion of that data from paper to make it electronic. There was another advancement that gave us a rule to support online transactions. So consumers, for example, you or I as an individual can go online and do things like pay a bill, make a purchase. It works in the same way that maybe when you sign up for a loan and you select an automatic debit every month, that's the kind of debit transaction that you're authorizing when you do an online bill payment. You're authorizing another party to pull the money from your account. So those type of online transactions was yet another evolution. Formatting ACH transactions to carry the data necessary to support OFAC screening. OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets Control. That organization, a government organization, establishes the rules about how we have to screen transactions that might have an international transactional nature. So Nacha developed rules that helped enable ACH transactions, not just to be domestic, but to cross borders and travel internationally. More recently, about 8 years ago, same-day ACH was an innovation. That is where it no longer required overnight processing to settle and clear an electronic transaction. ACH could be originated early in the day, received later in the day, and settled the same day. Same-day ACH transactions have evolved themselves because the dollar amounts for each transaction, the limits have increased. We've added later deadlines throughout the day. And in looking at some innovation possibilities down the road, we can continue doing that with maybe some later deadlines in the day to accommodate the full business day, even into the Pacific coast, the west coast of the continental US. So same day ACH is still evolving. Final example is in March of this year, early March, 2 weeks ago, in fact, Nacha members approved a new set of rules intended to reduce the instances and to recover from instances of credit push fraud. So Nacha's keeping its eye on the risk landscape as well as the payment innovations and putting forth rules to help mitigate the risks for all participants and even enable recovery of some of the fraudulent transactions.
You know, it's really amazing when you think about it that, you know, this network that was created in the latter half of the 20th century, you know, as we moved into the 21st century with a variety of different payment related innovations, instant payments, cryptocurrency, peer-to-peer applications, that, you know, this payment system from the late 20th century that was considered innovative in the 1970s is still pretty relevant. Actually very relevant. I mean, speaking of legacy payment methods, checks remain a surprisingly persistent, I would argue, outdated method of payment. And as we pointed out earlier in this conversation, or I actually pointed out earlier in the conversation, they actually serve as an impetus for the creation of the ACH network.
Right.
All that being said, given the long-standing debate that exists about electronic payments versus checks, specifically, can you shed light on why ACH payments generally are still considered to be safer than checks, especially with the advancement of technology that we've seen as we've entered into the 21st century?
Yep. And I think you're exactly right. Checks remain vulnerable. In fact, the 2023 AFP Fraud and Control Survey report said checks continue to be the payment method that are most vulnerable to fraud. So ACH is secure and superior in its resistance to fraud in many cases for several reasons. One of them is that regulated financial institutions are the gatekeepers of the network. So in the creation of an ACH transaction, it begins with an originator, which is a business or small, large, even a government entity that wants to create a transaction. They introduce it into the network by going through a financial institution. And that role of that financial institution is really a gatekeeper role to let only valid originators create transactions. Second is that the ACH transactions themselves flow through a secure electronic channel from one regulated financial institution to another one, and then to its customer, the receiver. So the secure channel is superior in that the transaction and the data is in that channel throughout its life cycle, whereas a check might go out into the mail. It might be in someone's mailbox and susceptible to being picked up, could lie on someone's desk. But in any case, a paper check could be washed, the data could be altered, and it can be deposited by somebody other than the intended payee. So the security inherent in ACH gives it a leg up there. And then finally, if an originator, either accidentally or an unscrupulous originator doing it on purpose, were to create a transaction to debit someone's account and it wasn't authorized, there are strong consumer protections provided by Regulation E, which is a federal regulation, and the Nacha operating rules that give consumers the right to dispute and return those transactions. So good consumer protections in the event of an unauthorized entry.
It sounds as though, Nacha, the network, the various stakeholders have really put a lot of focus and energy around not only keeping ACH relevant, but also making sure that it continues to be safe. I mean, what I would remind our listeners is that Regions offers a full range of payment capabilities, which includes checks. But we do encourage our customers to consider electronic payment alternatives to checks whenever possible, as a way to really maximize the benefit of both efficiency and security that electronic payments, specifically today, we're talking about ACH, do offer. In fact, last year, Devin, Regions processed over 800 million ACH transactions. We were the 10th largest financial institution originator of ACH payments and the 12th largest receiver of ACH payments in the country. And I think it's important to call out that number 10 and number 12 out of literally probably 10,000 plus financial institutions that leverage the ACH network. So, we're really big fans of Nacha and of the ACH network.
You are, and we recognize and appreciate the volume that you all handle every year. I mean, you mentioned your placement on the list. Nacha publishes every year a list of the top 50 originating and receiving institutions, and Regions is always up there.
Yeah, we're really excited about that and proud of it.
Yep.
Okay, it's hard in today's environment to spend any amount of time talking about payments or really financial services in general without addressing, I'm going to go ahead and say it, fraud.
Yep.
In fact, the FTC, um, published a stat that said Americans last year lost more than $10 billion with a B,
Hmm.
due to fraud. I'm sure many of our listeners are wondering, what are some of the ways, more specifically at the ACH network, has really adapted to
Hmm.
some of those challenges that are presented by, we talked about ACH coming into the 21st century.
Hmm.
The threats that were present in the early 70s look a lot different as we're into well into the second decade of the 21st century. Can you talk about what measures Nacha has taken to ensure that that safety and integrity of ACH payments continues?
I sure can. The Nacha operating rules require ACH participants, first of all, to protect the sensitive ACH data, the sensitive transactional data and customer data. They focus on the security and the integrity of the data throughout its life cycle. They do things like requiring uh, security measures, requiring participants who handle the data to do self-assessments of their processes and procedures to ensure that they don't have vulnerabilities. And with things that are more modern or emerging, things like cyber threats, we emphasize the importance of resilience in responding to new and emerging threats. Nacha, for example, last October worked with the Global Resilience Federation to publish a paper that focused on resilience measures with ACH in mind. Resilience measures that ACH participants should adhere to ensure that they have the ability to bounce back from any kind of cyber threat or cyber attack. And in fact, we have participated in an exercise earlier in March and another one coming up April 17th. And it's put on by the Global Resilience Federation to allow ACH network participants to go to a tabletop exercise to respond to questions that help each of them assess their readiness in light of some of those standards that we published. So things like protecting the data, ensuring it's routed securely, doing self-assessments to ensure that your policies and procedures are keeping up with changes, and then focusing on the resilience in the event of maybe a focused cyber attack. Those are all things that Notch is supporting to ensure ACH remains safe and sound.
Obviously, safety, security are top of mind within the ACH network, and I know Nacha plays a key role. And again, that composer slash conductor, role to make sure that they play a great role in terms of helping to continue to drive focus and security. You mentioned the AFP survey,
Right.
and in that survey, it does reference about checks being, especially from the perspective of businesses and treasury practitioners, a distinct vector
Hmm.
for fraud attacks. In fact, I think it was about 65% of those that were surveyed said that they faced fraud activity directly as a result of the utilization of checks, either writing checks or receiving those checks. I'm going to go back to that age-old question, ACH or checks, which are safer. In what way does ACH really offer advantages both to businesses and the consumers
Hmm.
over check payments, particularly in terms of efficiency, speed, and then again, security?
Yeah. Well, the security ones, just to recap a couple of things I mentioned, we have the NACHA rules have requirements that the parties that handle the data assess themselves to ensure they measure up to the control standards, that they handle sensitive data securely, handle it securely throughout its life cycle. We promote like the encryption of data at rest, for example, if it's not being used in a transaction. When it is being used in the transaction, it's transmitted through a secure electronic network. In addition, ACH is, beyond just the security aspects of it, ACH is superior to maybe a check in many cases because it's faster. ACH can settle same day. ACH is very low cost, it is efficient, and it is automated. I mean, that's what the A stands for. So it's a very hands-off process. Once it's created, it flows right to the receiver and updates the receiver's account information. Even when it's not automated, when people handle ACH transactions, say in a business-to-business environment, the transactions can carry data that aid in the reconciliation. So to get pretty technical, there are some addenda records that can go with the transaction itself that can help describe the transaction and aid in that reconciliation. So I think the things that make it a superior choice are the reach, that it can reach a deposit account at every institution in the country, the cost, the speed, and it can clear and settle same day, and the efficiency in that it can be purely hands-off, or in the case where it needs to be handled, it can carry information to help support that.
Listen, it sounds to me like it has all of the ingredients of being almost a super payment methodology, especially if we compare it to, the paper check.
I think it's a very robust technology, and it's not frozen in time. It's not. We're not limited to the 1970s transaction that first went across the network. It's evolved ever since then, like we talked about, and we've got many ideas still in mind to help it evolve further. So I think it's going to be supporting various use cases for years to come, and be a payment method of choice.
All right, so you opened yourself up for this, Devin. So we know that it played a key role as we transitioned as a country from analog to digital
Right.
payments. As you think about the future,
Mhm.
how do you see ACH payments continuing to evolve, especially in light of, most recently things like blockchain technology, real-time payments, even as we think about the evolution of payments into the metaverse, what role will ACH payments play in this, next generation landscape of financial transactions?
I think it's going to play a big role, and it won't be diminished anytime soon. It may be around uh, with all the other payment types forever. So some of the reasons I say that are some of the instant payments that we've seen come out have moved our mindset to a 24/7 mentality for payments. ACH can't do that today, but all the participants that enable ACH, the financial institutions, Nacha, the network operators, are talking about why can't it be? What would it take to evolve it to the next step? And we can get there in incremental ways, building on what we've done already. Same day ACH is a perfect example of that. We've added later deadlines, and we're talking actively about how we can add still later deadlines. We're contemplating what it would take to enable ACH processing over weekends and holidays where they don't transact today. So, looking at the tools, the settlement mechanisms provided by the operators, the things that are the invisible background stuff that make ACH work, all of that is also existing in an evolving world where we're thinking about how to make changes. Those changes are going to support advancements to ACH that'll help keep it relevant. So we are continually looking at rules to take advantage of advancements. We're continually asking for technological advancements to help support new rules. And when emerging threats come along, like credit push fraud, when it tries to move into a new payment channel, ACH responded by developing a rule set that our members approved to help tackle that. So I think those are the things that are going to keep us relevant for a very long time.
With so many, consumers and businesses relying on ACH on a day-to-day basis. And I would argue it's really a key component of our economy here in the US in terms of how money gets moved on a day-to-day basis. I don't doubt that the relevancy of ACH is going to continue far into the horizon of the future, and very excited to see that evolution continue.
Yeah.
Hey, Devin, our time's coming to a close for this episode, but I did want to thank you for taking time out of your busy calendar to share with us how Nacha and the ACH network are working to keep ACH safe after 50 years. And we look forward to another 50 plus years of Nacha and the ACH network.
Yep. Well, thank you for having me, Tim. It was a pleasure to be here, and enjoyed talking with you.
All right. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to today's episode. Until next time, have a great day.